Thank you very much for the introduction. So I'm going to talk about how to travel to high-risk destinations as safely as possible. And you notice I didn't say safely, because it's never safe. There's always risks, there's always countermeasures, there's always trade-offs to make. So just try to minimize your risk, know what the risks are, and then be able to minimize them. So quick overview. We're just going to talk about the relative risk of travel versus everybody's normal security issues that are day-to-day, and some tools, techniques, and procedures that'll help. And then there's some things that I've used and other people have used that have worked really well, and things that haven't worked very well, and some research areas. There's a whole bunch of cool things that could be done in the future, some of which I'm working on, some of which I think are more community type things. And then there's some things where both people more in the activist or voter or educator's perspective can help, or also opportunities where people that are either a CISO or otherwise in charge of security policy can have an influence within their own organization. So real quick, I'm a cypherpunk from the early 1990s. I found the mailing list when I was like 12, and it was the most life-changing experience when you're like a 12-year-old kid learning that if you build the right kind of math, biggest organizations in the world, governments, militaries, can't break it. And it's a completely amazing thing. Then I did this offshore data haven in the North Sea called Havenco. It was the crazy World War II anti-aircraft fort that turned into a pirate radio place, which then turned into an offshore data center. We were trying to host all sorts of content that wasn't permitted in other countries, and we wanted to have very definite law. And then a completely different thing, I went to Iraq and Afghanistan for 8 years and worked as a defense contractor, setting up satellite networks and working in hospitals and things like that, which was very, very different. Then I started a trusted computing startup called CryptoSeal that got bought by Cloudflare in 2014. Worked there for 2 years, and now I'm doing a new startup that's in this general space, but this is not a sales pitch, it's just general about the tech. So what's actually important about being able to speak about this is I've traveled to about 100 countries and territories and other places around the world. I travel probably 30 weeks out of the year. I'm a frequent traveler in a bunch of programs. I travel with lots of computer equipment, which is exactly what you don't want to do for safety. And I'm on a bunch of interesting lists as a virtue of having done defense stuff, so I'm on other people's lists, and then doing other crazy activism stuff, so I'm on other, so I get to have fun. So just a quick show of hands, who is actually from Las Vegas? Who traveled to get here other than the people from Las Vegas? Yes, so that's why travel's special. People travel for professional conferences, for vacations, all this stuff all the time. And if you travel, who traveled from the United States? Who traveled from not the United States? So that's also a lot of people. Exposure to multiple jurisdictions is what's special. If you're in one place, you have one set of laws usually that apply to you. If you cross a border, then you have at least two sets of laws. And what's actually crazy is you have a different set of laws at the border itself from both the losing and gaining country. So there's all sorts of special laws there. You're away from your own offices, your base of support, everything else like that. It's out of your ordinary experience. You don't travel on a specific route every single day, so it's different each time. And the people who travel, especially to conferences like this, are among the most interesting targets to attack out there. And imagine if there were, B-Sides is actually probably a bad target market to attack because we can defend ourselves. But if you went to, say, a journalism conference where they're talking about legal rights for migrant workers in Latin America or something, those people do not have any particular technical resources to defend themselves. Plus, they have very serious adversaries. So conferences like that are great targets to attack. And then there's always changing and evolving threats because they're not something you see every day. You have different ones that pop up all the time. So what's new? Why do we care now? Government people have always had to worry about this stuff. There's a travel briefing, pre-travel, everything else you have to do when you go to certain countries. I'm sure spies, I've never worked for the IC, but if you work in the intelligence community, they have even more stringent requirements. But those people have the resources to defend themselves and have known about this for a long time. However, now economic espionage means that everybody's a target. You can be a company employee, you can be a university person who has interesting intellectual property that you're working on, like a chemical engineering person that's working on a new paint pigment or something, all sorts of crazy stuff like that. And that totally changes the profile of the people that are targets and the resources they have to defend themselves. And then you have countries that, because of terrorism or the threat of terrorism, they're throwing out all the rules. There used to be in intelligence this concept of Moscow rules that applied when you're in Moscow if you were a spy and you knew you were part of that set of people. Internationally, if you're the son of somebody in the Middle East and you're traveling to wherever, those rules might apply to you even when you come to the US. So it's kind of crazy. And people travel all the time now. So this is a huge problem. And the other crazy thing is people are traveling. I travel with probably about 10 devices when I travel domestically. and those are all targets, and they're all good to attack. Certain kinds of travel are a lot more risky than other travel. There's international travel across international borders is super risky relative to other travel. Travel where you're invited to come by somebody else, like say when somebody posts a job offering or a come to us to buy advertising for your torrent site in a nearby country that has more favorable laws, things like that. Because the attacker knows where you're there and you have to assume the attacker's the one who initiated the request to travel. And there's also a weird trade-off here. There's a trade-off between if you know certain travel that you do all the time, you're a lot more familiar with it, but it's also more predictable. Whereas if you do something for the first time, you don't know much about it, but the attackers don't know as much to attack you. So there's this other concept of like individuals that are themselves high risk. There's a location-based issue that makes you high risk. There's also people that are high risk. So some people, by virtue of their own identity and what they've done in the past, are super high risk. There's this like zero to Snowden concept. You want to be really, really close to zero, not really, really close to Snowden in terms of how much of a target you are. So those are usually because of things that you've done yourself, and so you know that this has happened. There's people who get like the 4 S's on their airline boarding passes all the time, who get detained in customs. They mostly know that they're a target. Then there's people who, by virtue of somebody that they know, either a family member or somebody they associate with, becomes a target. Employment, if you work at a company or if you work at a even in cases like we saw in Belgium, if you worked at an ISP that happened to provide transit to target networks and target countries that were very attractive, the sysadmins within that company became targets. So some of those people are targets on their own. And of course, source and destination. If you go to Turkey, even like 3 months ago, if you went to Turkey, even as a transit person, you would get marked as a special person and bad stuff would happen. And then, of course, some people have a routine history. So this is unfortunately a hard problem. Like, as I said, as safely as possible, not safe. If you're a super target, like if Snowden wanted to fly from Russia to here, there's nothing I can tell him that's going to be helpful to protect any computing devices he takes with him, aside from the most important piece of advice, which I'll give in a little bit. But there's no silver bullet here that's going to solve all this stuff. Lots of variables, and so this is more if you're somebody responsible for a team or a company or an organization. The users that travel a lot are usually very senior people or very sort of like rainmaker salespeople or whatever else. So they're going to not really follow the policies that you tell them. They're going to do crazy stuff like set up their own mail server in their bathroom or something like that. They're the kind of people that would do that kind of thing. They're not the people that will check off every box. So it's a problem, and you have to be aware of that when you're doing training. And because they're away from you, you can tell them something, but if they can get away without doing it, they're going to not do it. If you tell them like don't connect to local networks or whatever, it's very difficult to enforce that policy if you don't have a technical control against users that just want to get their job done. And stuff changes, so you don't really know in advance all the stuff. So as I said, there's nothing I can do that it's really going to help Snowden aside from telling him not to travel or don't take any computing devices. There's certain people that are out of scope. I would say I can't really help anyone in the government personnel side because the crazy thing about government security is that it defines both a ceiling and a floor, which is exactly the same level for how secure something has to be. You must comply with a policy, but there's also not a whole lot of motivation to exceed the policy. So just follow your policies, and that's about as good as you're going to do. People who are extremely high risk, like Snowden, yeah, not really going to be able to help. And then people who are very low risk, I think it's more important that if you're not a target, if you're not likely to be a target, you should just do your regular security stuff. That'll work better. They're not really terribly attractive. But there's a Goldilocks region of people that are just enough of a target and then to be interesting for travel, but not so high that they can't be defended. So that's the Goldilocks region. We have to think about what factors influence this risk, how specifically they're targeted, and all these things. So there's certain places that are just known to be targeted, like high attacker environments. Say, if you go to certain cafes that are known, or whatever. So there are various things like that. If you're part of an organization that's a target of interest, things like that. So you'll know how specifically you're targeted. If it's something where you think you're a target because you're part of a huge organization, you're going to get one level of effort. If you're target because there's like 3 or 4 people in your tiny group or whatever, it's going to be a different level of targeting. There's the other idea here, which is that the people attacking you are going to use different modalities. You want to make sure that if you are vulnerable to something, you're vulnerable to something that is either less common, or another way of thinking about all this is if it became known that you got hacked through that particular technique, how embarrassing would it be? If you know that you got hacked because of 0-day and all sorts of stuff, it's bad, but like you're still going to keep your job and nobody's really going to call this incompetence. But if you get hacked because you had no SSL on your like login page or something, that's a different thing. So how intrusive the techniques are that the attacker's putting up against you. I'd say there's sort of a progression of mostly passive network monitoring, which you can just assume everywhere on the internet, up through active network attacks where they inject traffic into your specific machine, or say network hacking remote type stuff. Physical access, which is one of the things that travel gives them a lot more access to do, where they can non-destructively image your machine or something like that. Hardware implants, and then the evil maid problem of multi-round physical access. So as those things get more intrusive, they're less likely to be blanket, they're more likely to be targeted at you specifically. So you should make sure you're resistant against all the things that are sort of in the environment, and less so, like it's less important to defend against things that are super targeted, because they're less likely to happen for most people. And another huge element of this is how, once you get compromised, assuming you do get compromised, how bad is the compromise? Like how long is the compromise gonna last? The ideal is that only data that's your current like working set of data is what's compromised. That is very challenging to achieve if you don't plan ahead. In a lot of cases, if you carry your laptop into a country, you're going to get, and it gets compromised, everything that was on that laptop is going to be potentially known to the attacker, and that's a problem. But the real target of a lot of these attacks, especially the automated, low-effort, wide attacks, but the network active attacks, is future and ongoing system access. So they'll attack a machine purely to install software on it so they can then attack other networks that are more protected. So that's a particular area of interest that we'll go over in a little bit. And then, of course, you want to see how resourced the attacker is, how seriously you want to attack. I think it's an open question whether you'd rather be targeted by a like super awesome organization that doesn't really care much about targeting you specifically versus a less credible organization with extreme interest. I think the things that don't scale, like physical attacks or targeted implants, they're more likely to be the less capable organization that really cares about you, because people are the one quantum unit of size. A very capable organization will put a lot of blanket stuff in there, but they're still not going to have an order of magnitude more, or many orders of magnitude more people dedicated to you. And then, of course, the consequence of failure. Another element of risk is like, how bad is it if you get compromised? If you're a journalist or something in Latin America, maybe your sources' lives are at risk. Whereas for me, in most cases, it would be if I have keys that belong to customers or things like that might get compromised, or commercial return. And it's really hard to value like lives versus money, but it's definitely something you have to put in there. And then how much resources you have to defend. If you're a government, you have a lot of resources. I think the people that actually have the best resources are people that build their own platforms, say like Apple, Google, people like that own the operating system, own the application, and are very familiar with how everything works and can modify things. The well-resourced enterprise is buying stuff off the shelf in most cases and implementing policy, and they're probably less capable of defending themselves than the people building the platforms, and then everyone else. And then the crazy problem here is the people that are the most targeted are often the least resourced to defend themselves. So it's sort of unfortunate. Degree of exposure, all this stuff. This is more for if you're managing a group of people. If you have a lot of users and if they travel frequently, and if individual people out of that set travel infrequently, those people are at particular risk. If somebody is a salesperson who travels all the time, they're going to be a lot more familiar with this. If somebody's first trip to a place like China, it's going to be a bigger issue. So we've gone through that taxonomy. Let's think about the risk of specific cases. Just because, like, if I were going to go to North Korea, one, I'm not allowed to bring a lot of computer equipment. Two, I would assume they're not super resourced, but they are very motivated to attack anybody, and anything they want to do legally, they can do. So I would probably say that's way too challenging a security environment for me to try to advise people on what to do. And out on the low side, like domestic travel within the US or EU, that's basically your day-to-day environment. Maybe a conference is a different environment, but if you're going to just like regular stuff out of your office, that's kind of boring. Sort of unclear. Active conflict zones like Syria, I've been to places like this. I was in Iraq and Afghanistan when they were exciting, and I guess they're still exciting. They're exciting again. Those are interesting because the adversaries you face are willing to do a lot of stuff that's very bad, and if you were compromised and somebody took your laptop and was like looking for evidence that you're like part of the US government or something, they're gonna probably err on the side of being very bad to somebody that's innocent versus letting somebody go otherwise. So it's a dangerous environment that might be too high a risk to really deal with current stuff. US to Russia, depending on who you are, yeah, unclear. And EU, visiting the US, like I know a lot of people, like including people from the security community, even the last couple days have had negative encounters with customs and immigration. But I still think it's a pretty low risk. The US is mostly a law-abiding country with respect to customs and immigration, so it might not be so exciting. However, there's something in the middle here that's like perfect for all this stuff. It's Western people going to China. So it's cool because it's commercial targets. They're interested in your IP, or they're interested in access to your networks. They're not interested in like imprisoning you forever to like find out about some spying organization or something. As long as you don't get involved in domestic politics in China, you're pretty much okay. And they're pretty law-abiding. Like there's questions about how China treats their own citizens in China, but in terms of international stuff, they're pretty reasonable. And there's a lot of people who go to China for business. It's the place you build everything. It's a great country, a huge country, all sorts of other stuff. And it's actually fun as a defender because they're technically sophisticated, so you're gonna see really exciting attacks. Back when I worked at Cloudflare, we saw some of the most amazing network attacks coming from China that were coming from a large country in Asia that were incredibly advanced, and they were very adaptive. So as an adversary, they're really great. And you can sort of judge how good a defender is by the kind of adversaries they fight against. If you're going up against somebody who's very good, you're gonna raise your game. So China's a good country as a target for this. So my real target here is to avoid special treatment. You wanna be part of a large set of people. You don't wanna do anything that's really setting you apart as a super paranoid person. Black Phone had a lot of nice ideas about what they were doing and a lot of cool stuff. Unfortunately, carrying a black phone in your hand at customs sort of identifies you as somebody who really cares about privacy and security, and that's not necessarily something you want to communicate to the immigration and customs person in front of you. And I want to also, so I want to both resist attacks, and I don't want to be embarrassed by the kind of attacks that I fall victim to if I do fall victim to something. I want to make sure I'm completely safe against passive network attacks and routine network attacks. If somebody has multi-round physical access as a maid to my hardware, it's bad, but it's not great. I worked on something a couple years ago using nail polish to seal a laptop by like putting it over the screws. So there are countermeasures you can build against hardware attacks, but they're a different category, and for an attacker, it's a lot more resources. They have to put a team on you and everything else. And the other thing is, if you're targeted and they're in your room or whatever doing with their stuff, you don't want to piss them off, because we have the advantage here that they're treating this as like gathering a bunch of information that might be attractive to them. You don't want to become like a special project or to antagonize them such that you might get more attention than you otherwise would. And I want to use technology here. I don't want to use like crazy effort or anything else, because if I go to China, I want to actually get work done. So we've got some techniques that can actually help. So there's actually a lot of overlap with just like good conventional security stuff. If you take a machine that's unsafe in the US to a higher threat environment, it doesn't magically get secure. So you want to at least be secure in your baseline state. There's a lot of stuff about that, like many conferences, many guides about that. This also, I'm generally talking about this from the perspective of somebody who goes on a trip to a place, from a safe place to a location that's a higher threat environment and then comes back. If you're gonna go and just permanently operate in a higher threat environment, you don't have some of the same assumptions that you can make, so it becomes a harder problem to solve. So it really has to be like a finite place that has like a safe place. There's an argument that no place is safe anymore, but yeah. So the first step is you wanna minimize your threat surface. So as I travel with like 10 machines or whatever, that's a very bad practice when you're going to a place that's high threat. You want to limit the amount of equipment and the variety of equipment. It's better certainly to have like 10 MacBooks than it is to have every possible operating system, every possible version. It's the same issue you have on a regular network. If you have a very diverse user pool, the lowest common denominator is what gets hacked, not everything else. So one of the things that organizations do, particularly when they're going to defend against these hardware attacks, is they have a dedicated pool of travel hardware that's a special set. Like they might, in the US, let you use whatever computer you want to use. But when you travel, you have to pick from a specific set of machines that you're using for that. And there's a little bit more about that later. You definitely want to prepare this stuff in advance. It's crazy to take a laptop and then go like out of the box in the US and then go to China and then suddenly try to auto-update everything. One, a lot of stuff doesn't actually auto-update, and other cases it can be intercepted and modified. So you want to prepare in advance, and you want to know, generally don't go to your security people or be the security person with like a couple hours notice that somebody's going to go. You want to give them as much advance notice as possible. You definitely want to harden your systems. There's some great security guides. Filippo from Cloudflare, the Gruck, some other people have done operating system specific hardening guides for mobile platforms, for desktop operating systems, everything else. You want to implement those policies in advance, and you want to plan ahead as much as you possibly can. The other thing is you want to minimize data. So this concept of you want to make sure that the only data that gets compromised, if you're compromised while you're there, is the computer itself. You don't want to carry your like 6 years of email history on your laptop so that if it gets compromised, including being told, decrypt your laptop now and give it to me, or else you, one, can't continue your ship, or two, can't leave the country. You don't want to have to, you don't want to be in a position where you have all the data there. The best practice is to travel with only tools, not to have any actual data that belongs to you. Because I have no problem turning over, I mean, it's like expensive machine, but I have no problem turning over a machine that only has like vendor operating system and some security tools if it has no data. I'll just go buy another machine, which is unfortunate, but whatever. But if it has all your data, it's very bad. Sort of related is you don't want to have credentials on your machine that can get access to other systems. One of the main targets of these attacks is gaining access to systems that they can't otherwise attack. So either gaining data that's on the machine while it's there, or if you have a very locked down network, attacking an endpoint while it's in country is actually a very attractive thing to do. So if I can steal somebody's SSH key that's deployed in all the production infrastructure back in the US, probably not a good idea. I've worked at companies where they sent some of the most senior sysadmins to countries to do this kind of work, and they did need to have work access, so there is a trade-off there, but you certainly don't want to have long-lived credentials that are on everything. If anything, you would have a short-lived credential that can be revoked after the trip. And don't bring anything that has more privilege than you need. You should be very, very cautious about that. There's another potential thing you can do, which is to buy hardware while you're there. That has positives and negatives. So the way people do travel pools of laptops, they either, just like people do for conference laptops, I think was another thing. There's two schools of thinking there. One is to get something that's really locked down, that you put a lot of effort into locking down. Two is to buy something that's completely off the shelf, that has nothing special on it, use it just don't trust it at all, and assume that it might get hacked, but it has nothing on it of any value. That can work really well. Unfortunately, that requires a lot of user training. I think that's actually a good solution for security professionals at a conference or something. Not such a good solution for a security professional telling their execs what to do in the future in the field in an environment where they're not going to be particularly monitored or anything. But for somebody who's a security professional, it works pretty well. Another sort of annoying travel-specific issue is you want to protect personal accounts. A lot of organizations have pretty strict guidelines about work use of personal machines. I know US government is very, very particular about personal accounts on work machines and traffic like that. And in general, that's a good separation, because whatever people do on their personal machines, one, can bring liability to your organization, and two, can be it can bring legal liability for the actions they're doing. It can also be a vector of attack if they're using it to browse some sketchy site or whatever. But if you send your execs to a place like China and their Facebook accounts get hacked while they're there, and someone uses that to then look at their social network or whatever else and then attack other users, that becomes a problem both for you and for the exec themselves. And it's, one, hard to recover from, two, can be more of an issue. So it's probably a good idea to actually give users training and guidance on protecting their personal accounts when they go to high-threat environments like this, just to eliminate that as a possibility. Virtualization is a great solution there, some sort of separation, but it's definitely something you consider when you're setting up policies or when you're doing security stuff. And unfortunately, I think probably 30 years people have been talking about user security training as being a critical thing. I think there are environments where user security training works exceptionally well. There are environments where it doesn't work particularly well. Sending someone to a new to them environment where stuff doesn't work by default, and telling them they must remain compliant with policies that were set by somebody who they view as far away and like out of touch with their actual needs is probably the worst possible environment to get compliance with these requirements. So the trick that I found is actually to make the secure way the easy way to do whatever they're doing. China's awesome for this because the Great Firewall actually makes it hard to do a lot of routine operations like browsing regular websites or whatever else. So the user actually really wants a VPN. They want to use something like that. So if you can make that secure, then it wins. So offering them some sort of benefit if they do things well is a major positive. So what actually works? Some things work pretty well, other things don't. I'll go over both. So for China specifically, the Great Firewall is probably the #1 concern most people have. It's both the passive and active network attacks. There's a lot of, it's basically an environment where you must have a VPN to get normal work done. A lot of sites, and the crazy thing about the Great Firewall is there's not a Great Firewall of China. There is a different firewall basically in every province and every network operator. So that's like 40 different options, and it changes over time. So saying, and it changes pretty substantially over time. So there's probably not a single VPN that's like a wide scale thing that works really great all the time, but some of the ones that are advertised for China work pretty well, and certain things work well or not. The things that work not well from a corporate environment are a lot of the corporate, like IPsec VPNs are more likely to be blocked, and a lot of the big free providers are blocked, because in general, I would argue that the Great Firewall of China is to protect the Chinese government from Chinese nationals viewing Western sites. It's not so much to protect them from Westerners visiting and doing stuff. It's more collateral damage. So there's ways to make a VPN that'll work particularly well, or that will work better than other ways. If you can have one that's got a small user population that's dedicated to your pool of users, that helps a lot. International roaming works awesome. It's a little bit expensive unless you buy it from the right providers, but because of the way it's set up, it actually gets tunneled. It bypasses most of the firewalling. It's pretty awesome. Dedicated pools of travel equipment, I think, are the standard at basically every Fortune 500 at this point, and at any security-aware organization that's going to China. There's either dedicated pools of equipment or the buy it there, don't do anything policy. It's really a pain to do that, because I've seen organizations where they buy a bunch of like iPhone 5. There's 3 ways to do it. So people go and they buy like an iPhone 5 from the Apple store, and the first thing the exec does is they put in their personal iTunes account to activate the phone, which I watched happen twice in front of me, which while lousy was kind of annoying. So you have to really help the users build this kind of stuff. And the other thing is you can go, like, people either use their oldest hardware for this kind of travel, or, which has problems. You're sending your very high profile, very demanding users with your oldest, crappiest hardware. They get angry at you. It might break. Kind of sucks if you cheaped out like $100 on saving on a laptop and it breaks while a user's in Beijing for 2 weeks. Causes problems. And the other option is you take a regular machine that's on all your systems and you just set up a dedicated machine there, but then you have access to your regular systems if it's compromised. And then there's the problem of if you just go to like Best Buy and buy the cheapest random like laptop, it might not be what the user's used to. It also probably includes a bunch of awesome like spyware or whatever vendor crapware by default, so it doesn't work particularly well. So there's a lot of problems there. If you can manage a dedicated travel pool hardware program, that works great, but it's that. And then tools, it's crazy, like Snapchat, if it weren't blocked in China, would actually meet a lot of the requirements for a great security application. Doesn't have any history. A lot of transport security encrypted by default. It's on a relatively secure platform, everything else. So tools that are sort of like non-permanent or ephemeral by default are a great idea. So maybe push your users toward like chat systems that delete their histories, things like that. There's a lot of stuff you can do if you're setting up a mail provider that was just gonna work in China. You would set a low, like a document retention policy, a very short period, just so that the data's not there. There's that. So those are the things that work. Unfortunately, we have a lot more data stuff that doesn't work. So special hardware. So this was the route some people have taken. If you have special hardware that's advertised as like super secure government stuff, not good. There's people that would go to like war zones, like Syria and places like that, were very, very particular that they had to be carrying stuff that everybody else had in the environment, because just carrying the crazy stuff would make you much more of a target. If you had like a crazy satellite phone or whatever else, you were clearly like somebody special, so that's not good. Chromebooks, initially I thought would be an awesome solution here because they don't store a lot of data locally, everything encrypted, they're super secure by default, probably the most secure desktop operating system today by default. Unfortunately, for technical and business reasons, Google makes them depend on Google services a lot. So if Google's blocked, which it is in most of China, the stuff doesn't work very well. Another idea was desktop as a service. It's great because the data is not on your laptop, it's on a remote machine. Unfortunately, you're on a lot of pretty mediocre networks that have latency, jitter, low bandwidth, everything else. And in a lot of cases, you're doing desktop as a service from China back to the US, and then you've got even more latency. So there's a lot of issues with that. Then certain providers like Google, Facebook, Twitter are sort of blocked, and then the crazy thing is so many things depend on those that a lot of other stuff's broken, so you definitely need to use a VPN. A lot of public VPNs are blocked, and then some corporate VPNs are blocked. So there's that. And then there's a whole category of stuff that fails. It's a good idea, but can fail fairly often. So full disk encryption. I'm certainly not going to argue against full disk encryption, but if you have full disk encryption and you have a password you can use to unlock it, and somebody at customs says you must unlock this, depending on the country, depending on all the context, that may be a request that you have to comply with. And yeah, that sucks. Secure messengers, I think it was in Turkey during the coup about a week and a half ago. The problem with phones is that people would, the security people on the bus would say, they use WhatsApp a lot there, so it would say, you show me your WhatsApp history. There's only one copy of WhatsApp on your phone, so they know if you're telling them yes or no. And if you say you're not using WhatsApp, they'll just look really quickly. So they have a good way to tell if they can verify that they're actually getting the data they want. And stuff that depends on user actions. There's all sorts of crazy ideas about setting up telltales in your room and all sorts of other stuff and keeping your laptop chained to your wrist the whole time when you're there. Security people might do that. Corporate execs are not going to do that, especially when you can't enforce the policies. So you need to make sure this stuff works in a way where they can't, it's easy for them. And the other thing that I had never really thought about that is kind of annoying is if you leave for a 3-week trip to someplace and you realize that your system is in some way compromised, you might not have a better alternative. Here, you can just go grab a new machine from stock and reissue it. If you're in a place, you might be stuck using a machine that you think might be compromised, and it might not be a clear case of that, and you might have to advise somebody to do that. So it kind of sucks. So as we've seen, this whole problem today exists. There's no great solutions. There's lots of sort of solutions that can do stuff, but nothing perfect. So it's a great opportunity to actually build stuff that works better. So I'd say there's probably 5 categories of things that can be built. A few of these things I'm working on. A lot of these things are things that industry needs to work on to sort of solve this problem for people. So number one area is better VPNs. So you want VPNs that work particularly for this case of people in China or work for people that are traveling. Right now there's a split between public or free VPNs and sort of commercial or a corporate VPN for your dedicated small pool of users. And that's definitely a good split. There's the concept of if they're going to prioritize which endpoints they're going to block them based on how many users they have or how attractive the users are. If it's your corporate user base or you have multiple VPNs, it's not really a terribly attractive target unless your company is a specific target. So it's better if you have something dedicated. The other thing that's worked particularly well has been having fallbacks. So you give people 4 or 5 different network options that they can use, and if one of them doesn't work, fall back to the other one. Usually splitting that up by different protocols and having a UDP-based OpenVPN, having a TCP-based VPN, different IP addresses, different things there, so that you can degrade if the thing doesn't work very well. But I think there's a lot of work that can be done in the protocol space to make this a lot better. There's providers that have WebSockets within China, which would be an interesting way to transport data out. The Tor the Tor transports people have done a lot of stuff on the circumvention side there. The problem is, for most users, using Tor 24/7 is not really a good solution. Too much latency, too much other stuff. So there's probably things that can be taken from that and used, but not necessarily use Tor itself. And one of the things I worked on a while ago was actually more Gruck and some other people worked on, the idea of using a hardware VPN appliance to protect multiple machines. There's good and bad to that. One, it fails the special hardware that's secure, and it calls you out as a security conscious person. But Travel Router actually is a really convenient thing to use, so there might be a trade-off there. I would probably say it's probably a good idea if you can excuse it as a convenience or productivity device versus a security device. But I wouldn't carry like a crazy like MIL 810 VPN or something. Desktop as a service is so VPNs, there are good solutions, but they're not great solutions, things like that. Desktop as a service is an area that does not work well from China at all and could work well from China. So there's a lot of R&D that could be done here to make stuff that works really well. The fundamental problem is the network doesn't work very well, and the desktop as a service stuff works at a very high level in the applications, not very tailored to the individual applications, so it's much more network intolerant than it should be. If you were to build applications that were more efficient on how they use the network, you'd have a lot better luck. And this is that. And then two other hardware devices. There's the laptop and then the phones. So I think the holy grail of laptops for this would be some sort of like disposable laptop. Unfortunately, like this is a $2,500 laptop. The cheapest laptop you're realistically gonna get somebody to use is like $200 or so. And $200 per company is disposable. $200 for like a journalist that's going to Latin America is probably not disposable for them, unfortunately. So figuring out a way that you can make hardware that is more inexpensive has a lot of benefits here. If I knew my machine were a target of an attack, I would probably replace it. I probably would not replace a $2,500 laptop on a routine basis otherwise. So as the hardware gets cheaper, it gets better. And the key thing that laptops need that they don't have is a way to go from the operating state to a known good state at any given time and guarantee that's the way it's going to be. The problem is most laptops today, or basically all machines today, have state on many, many places in their machine. There's the main SSD or whatever, but also every other component on the device has firmware, some sort of flash, everything else. So you can't really tell if a machine is being returned to exactly the same state each time. Plus, there's hardware modifications that can be made. There's a lot of buses on there that are easy to modify, chips, everything else. Depends on how much effort they're going to put into it, but that's a problem. So maybe some sort of hardware that's more tamper evident. I would say that as the fewer components, better, which also helps cheaper. So we're moving that trend in general, but there isn't a real effort to make the laptop as tamper evident as possible. The crazy thing is it also makes it less repairable, but whatever. And then just sort of like reduced functionality. So the reason why travel is actually interesting for a lot of high security stuff is users might not accept a little bit of pain on their day-to-day machine, but if you tell them you just have to deal with this for 2 weeks while you're on a trip, and you have to do it for security reasons, plus the baseline case is that their expensive laptop just won't work in that place, it's easier to get them to accept cool stuff. So it's good. Then phones. Phones are the other big area. Phones, cheaper than laptops, but still a good smartphone, maybe 50 bucks. That's still not super disposable, but it's getting definitely closer to disposable. They're great from the perspective of you can keep them with you all the time, but there's the concept of like baseband risk. So you've got like a second processor in your phone that could be attacked by your network operator, which maybe is a crazy thing to worry about if you're in your own country on your own network operator. Less crazy if you're on a network operator that is controlled by the state and the intelligence organization that is potentially your adversary. So that's a problem. And the problem with phones is they don't have virtualization. So the Turkish bus problem of you have one copy of WhatsApp on your phone, it's pretty easy for the attacker to say, oh, show me that WhatsApp. If you had some way to hide this data, it would be better. MDM, you definitely want MDM in a corporate environment for all your devices in the US. MDM doesn't work so well when you don't have great network connectivity to these devices and when users are popping SIMs in and out and all sorts of other stuff like that. So making something works better in that context. And the other thing that's a real pain is just like with laptops, you want to be able to get them back to the same state. Phones are a lot better at going from usable state back to like the same consistent state each time. But doing that in the field over a network is actually fairly hard still. In a lot of cases, it depends on, especially in the iOS environment, it depends on connectivity to Apple. So the iTunes, iCloud backup stuff doesn't work. Plus, for good reasons, a lot of the security data is not included in backups, especially network backups. So telling somebody they should wipe their phone on a regular basis, like every time they cross the border, is going to run into a problem of you then have to go to like set up your Google Authenticator each time and all sorts of other stuff. So there's sort of a trade-off there. So a better system for remotely imaging a phone, restoring it to a known good state, and everything else would be great. So it's possible for somebody to build all this stuff today, but it's harder to know if you're deploying this to like 20 or 100 or thousands of users that it actually works for two reasons. One, it's hard to do for a very small scale set of users, and it's also very hard to see when it's working or not. It has the security problem of if it fails, you don't know that it's failed, and you might be compromised. So it's a challenging problem. So you want something that's more visible. So these are all interesting areas. I'm working on a couple of these things, but a lot of them are that. So I have two sort of like calls to action. One, I think it's crazy, like this is a huge amount of effort, and I don't think we should have to deal with it. I think countries should not, especially people traveling into the US and into like relatively stable countries, should not have to worry about the government imaging their hardware, modifying it, doing all this crazy stuff. So there should be a regulatory regime that protects users that are visiting the country from this kind of invasive search if they're not suspected of a crime. And that's a huge political challenge. I think that's going to be a difficult problem to solve, but it'd be great to solve it. I'm not too optimistic about that. What I am optimistic about is when this stuff happens to people, I think the user has every incentive not to be public about this attack, because if you're a visitor to a country, you can, in almost every case, be rejected from that country or banned in the future for making any sort of complaint. But people who are citizens of the destination country, when they find out about these kind of abuses, should publicize them and take action against them. So, because they're in a much better position to do this. So, ideally that happens. And then if you have a pool of users that you're managing as a security officer, you really need to worry about this problem, like identify that it is a problem and deal with it. And I would probably say the baseline is to look at where the people are traveling. I think everybody should do that. Look at where they're traveling, how much of a target they are. Probably if they're going to places like China, Russia, places like that, the dedicated laptop and travel pool infrastructure makes sense. You're already going to need to set up VPN infrastructure for your customer, for your user population. So you have to do that. And then user training specific to travel. I think developing something, you really need to know your user population and your target countries that you're going to, but something about get feedback from people that have gone there previously, what specific networks work well, what tools work well, things like that. So it's sort of an interesting problem to solve, and I'm definitely happy to talk about any specific countries and travel and organization things. Otherwise, anyone who's interested in this stuff, I'd be super interested in talking with you. Cool, but thank you.